And welcome back. This is Lauren Kimball with ANI 150. In the previous tutorial with the Sci-Fi Crate, we went ahead and brought in the high poly version into ZBrush, and we just did a little bit of light sculpting, adding some wear, some tear, some details that were kind of fun. And now we're going to take what we did in ZBrush, the mesh that we carved up, that FBX file that was exported, and we're going to go ahead and use it to bake maps onto our low poly mesh via Substance Painter. So I've got Substance Painter open. I'm using the most recent version. If you're using an older version of Substance Painter, it's pretty much the same as far as, the tools and the workflow that we're going to be utilizing. The biggest difference, I would say, is that the asset window has been moved. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. So I'm going to go over here and go File, New. And under New Project, I'm going to choose the template that I want to be working in as far as the texture workflow. And I want to go with physical-based renders. So I'm looking for those PBRs, which there are 3. And usually, if you're in an older version, you might see something that says PBR, metallic roughness, and in parentheses it'll say algorithmic. That's what you'll want to select if you're working on an older version of Substance. The newer version of Substance, they have changed it to metallic roughness alpha blend or metallic roughness alpha test. I'm going to go ahead and click on alpha blend and use that version of the metallic roughness. If you don't see that because you're using an older version, just go with the one that says algorithmic. Alright, so I'm going to click on File next. So I've chosen the template that I want to work within, and now I'm going to clicks, tongue twisted, click on Select File, and immediately it's opening up my Scenes folder for my Sci-Fi Crate. If it doesn't open up your Scenes folder, like as your default, because you might not have it set to this, go ahead and find your Scenes folder. That's where your low poly and your high poly FBX files should be stored, including your ZBrush file. You want to keep everything nice and organized, so keeping everything in the Scenes folder is, I find to be pretty useful. So I'm going to click on Create Low, and I'm going to open it. So now I can see my template that I've selected, and I can see the file I've selected. I'm going to go down to Project Settings, and I'm going to change the document resolution to 2K to match our textures. And I can basically leave everything else alone. I do want to make sure that I'm using UV tile workflow. Very important. If you do not activate UDIMs, then Substance Painter won't know to load in those extra tiles, because in this particular asset, we learned about how to store our UVs into multiple tiles. Alright, under Import Settings, turn off cameras or auto unwrap. We've already laid out our UV maps, and we don't have any cameras that need to be imported. So you want your screen to basically look like this, and then press OK. Alright, so in the left window here we can see the 3D mesh, and over here we can see the UDIM tiles. Now you'll notice that by default I can see the top box and none of the others. Over here in the upper right hand corner you have your texture set list. Remember when we applied all those different materials to different pieces? Well, now that we have it loaded into Substance Painter, we can actually use these materials as a way to isolate different pieces of our mesh. So since we put different materials on everything, we can isolate them. So if I wanted to only work on my handles, I could click on this eyeball with a 1 that's focused view, and I'll only be able to see my handles. If I want to just work on my crate, then I can just click on this and I will only see my crate. And you don't have to do it this way. You could have put everything in one material. Me personally, I like having multiple materials to work with, so that's why I went with this route. Alright, so now I'm going to go down here. By default, you usually see the Layers menu, but we want to click on Texture Set Settings because we're going to go ahead and start baking some maps for this Sci-Fi Crate. So I'm going to scroll down, and I like all these settings. Everything looks good. We're going to click on Bake Mesh Maps, and now we're in the baking window. We're going to start by adjusting some of these common parameters. So first, the output size. We of course want 2048, so 2K, in order to match the resolution that we used in Maya. We can leave dilation width alone. We can also leave this unchecked. This is the, sorry for the sirens, my window's open. Alright, so we can go ahead and use, we can ignore the use low poly mesh. Under here we got the high definition mesh list. Let's go ahead and click on this. And this should take us back to our scenes window where we open the low poly crate from. And we're going to go ahead and load the Z crate high and press open. Okay? Alright, so scrolling down a little further, again, sorry for the noise in the background. I'm going to go ahead and, hold on, just thought I'd pause the recording while my dog was taking a drink. Alright, so anti-aliasing, we're going to go ahead and set this to 2 by 2. Well, actually no, while we're testing it, let's go ahead and turn off anti-aliasing. That way we don't have to wait forever to see what the result is. We can always apply anti-aliasing a little later when we like the result. Under match, and this is really important, we're going to want to click on by mesh name. The reason that you want to use by mesh name is exactly why we went through the trouble of naming all of the different pieces inside of Maya. So when we had crate high, we had crate low suffix for its twin inside of Maya. Same with everything else. So when you click match by mesh name, it's looking for the low poly mesh with the suffix low and the high poly mesh with the suffix high, and it's only going to bake those two assets to each other. The benefit of this is that you can get a really clean bake without necessarily having to explode the mesh. That's something that we talked about in a previous tutorial. The idea of actually separating all of the pieces before exporting so that you have nothing interfering with the rays as it's baking. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to keep normal map on, but I'm going to turn off world space normal, ID, curvature, position, and thickness. I'm going to be turning these back on in a little bit. For right now, I'm just going to be focusing on these two maps. So let's go ahead and say bake selected textures. I'm going to go ahead and pause my recording while this is happening because it's going to be taking its sweet time. Okay, so now the baking is finished, and immediately I see one baking process failed. See log for details. Let's open the log, and it looks like the high poly scene was required when baking the map from the mesh but could not be located. Okay, let's go back, and oh, that just opened it in a window. So one of these maps was not working. So probably what happened was when I exported the high poly crate, something was turned off. And we can figure out what that is really quick by just going through our baked maps. So I'm going to be over in this window here, and I'm going to press B a couple of times. So the first time it activates my ID map, I didn't bake one, so you're going to see all these cubes that basically mean there's nothing there. So let's just keep going. Here we go, AO map. Looks good, but one thing I notice is the handle. The handle is solid black, and it shouldn't be black because it's not hiding in some sort of crevice. So probably what happened was when I exported this crate, I may have forgotten to select or accidentally turned off the handles. Let's go ahead and continue looking through these baked maps. Remember, I'm pressing the B letter on my keyboard. And here we go, there's the normal maps. And as you can see, there is no normal map for the handle. None that I can see anyway. It's just purple. So that is probably our culprit, probably missing the handle. I'm going to press M for materials, and I'm going to go ahead and rebake these handles using, you know what, let's ignore the handles for a moment because I'm going to show you a great way to fix this if you ever experience an issue with any of your maps. But before we do that, let's go ahead and address the maps that did bake. So looking at things, let's start with the AO map. Get over here. AO map is looking really good. There are a few places where I think a bit of anti-aliasing filtering would make it just a little sharper, but generally speaking, I'm pleased with the output. Let's go ahead and look at the normal maps. So remember, there's two different sets of normal maps. There's the normal map, world normal maps, and then there's the regular normal maps. This is the one that we're looking for. So you'll notice that, honestly, I think this looks pretty good as well. The only thing that you might be curious about are these seams. So normal maps are going to leave seams. There's going to be a little bit of, it's going to be kind of obvious, in other words, when there's a seam on your normal map. There's a couple of ways you can deal with this. You can raise the resolution of your map. So if I go into Bake Mesh Maps and I pop that up to like, oh, I didn't mean to grab the dilation width. Let me change that. I think it was like 32, right? All right. I could change this to 4096. It's going to exponentially increase my bake time, but I mean that could help mitigate my normal map seams. The other thing I could do is I could manually paint over these seams if they bother me. A better solution would be to just go in and treat them as part of your wear and tear, some of your grunge, and just incorporate it into the diffuse. It ultimately probably won't affect things very negatively, but there are some solutions. Just know that if you see seams, it doesn't mean that you baked incorrectly. It just means that there's a seam, there's a UV seam, and it's always going to be showing a little bit. That's why, even though things have gotten better when it comes to seams as far as diffuse maps, color maps, you could just use something like the stamp tool to very easily blend a diffuse map so that there's no seam. It still matters when you're painting normal maps or when you're baking normal maps to be aware of where your seams are. So I think for the final bake, I'm just going to add a little anti-aliasing. I could do 2, I could do 4. Just realize that whatever changes you make to this, it's going to increase your bake time. I don't think I necessarily need to mess with the default rays. If I had things that were a little deeper, like maybe someone in the class decided I just want to punch in or put a fist through my crate a little bit, you might have a deeper indentation than these claw marks, then you're going to want to increase your rays so that you can actually see the depth of that. And you can only do it to a certain extent before the normal map breaks, but try messing with the distance rays first. Otherwise, this is working fine for me. I'm just going to up the subsampling, and I'm going to go ahead and rebake it. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my world space normals, my ID map, my curvature, my position, and my thickness. Actually, not my ID. I didn't set this up for an ID map. But all these other maps, I'm going to go ahead and bake out. And the reason that I want these other maps is they're going to help Substance Painter paint on the object. So there are some brushes in Substance Painter where these maps really help. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that these are all baked. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and click Selection. So as you can see, every material and every UDIM has a check mark next to it. So if there's anything that I ever want to go back and bake that's in a very specific UDIM or assigned to a very specific material, I have the power to only bake that thing. So I want to bake everything except the handles because we're having issues with the handles. So I'm going to turn off everything that is the handles material, and everything else that is a different material attached will go ahead and bake. So that's why I like putting on multiple materials. It ultimately exports with more maps, but it gives you more control in the baking process. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, let's bake selected textures. Boom. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. Alright, so all of our maps are baked, and as you can see, we didn't experience any errors this time because we turned off the handles. Now when I come over here, I can just click on the letter B and I can toggle through all the baked maps. So there's my world space map, no ID map because I deactivated that one. There's our AO map, our curvature map, position map, thickness map, our regular normal map, and back to world space normals. In order to look at all the maps combined into the material, all you have to do is click on M and you will be able to see it. Alright, so let's deal with these handles that we're having issues with, shall we? I'm going to go back over into the bake mesh maps and I'm going to click on selection, and I'm just going to turn off box and buckles and crate, turn on my handles, turn off my latches and my straps. So the only thing I'll be baking are my handles. Now if you didn't experience this issue, clearly you don't have to worry about it. But if you experienced the same issue or maybe something else didn't transfer over, this is how you would go about fixing it. Going back to my common section, there are 2 solutions I could entertain. One, I could just click on use low poly mesh as high poly mesh. That would sufficiently fix the problem. However, I happen to have, well first let me get rid of this mesh. So this is the ZBrush mesh. I'm just going to press minus there so that it's not in my view anymore. I'm going to click on this high definition mesh button and I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to grab the Crate High FBX. So this is the one over here, the one that says Z Crate High. This is the one I kicked out of ZBrush. crate high over here, this is the regular crate FBX that I exported from my Maya file. So I'm going to open it, and yeah, let's just leave the settings as they are and bake these textures. You see it says 6 textures selected for baking, so only 6 things will be baked total. And it's going to go relatively fast. So it's ignoring all of the maps that we previously baked, and it's only dealing with the handles. Now, when I go over here into my viewport and I toggle through the baked maps, I can see that the handles are now present. There's the proper AO map for the handles, curvature map, position map, thickness map, normal map. Still kind of missing because there wasn't there wasn't much to be baked as far as the normals. You can kind of see this little beveled edge, but otherwise there wasn't a lot to change there. And back to materials again. Alright, so next we're going to work on painting this crate and dealing with its actual channel maps. So you have the baked maps. That's what we were toggling through with B. And the other one is if I hit C, I'm actually going through channels that I can paint. So instead of baking them out, I have the opportunity to custom paint them. If I click over here in this drop-down menu, I can see there's the material view. Here are the channels that we have to work with. And then of course we have mesh maps. So that's another way to toggle through them. All right, and we'll pick up with this in our next tutorial.